So a little self-disclosure tonight. I am an introvert, as I believe are several others who regularly stand up in front of the crowd here. I'm actually an ISTJ on the Myers-Briggs scale, if anybody knows what that means. And some of you, probably aren't surprised by that. Some of you might be. I told a coworker the other day, I said, yeah, I'm kind of a classic introvert. And they said, no, you're not. I said, no, I really am. I'm kind of your classic type of introvert. I prefer to socialize in small, intimate groups rather than large public gatherings. I prefer a few deep relationships rather than many mere superficial ones. I could talk for hours about deep subjects, but I'm uncomfortable with small talk. And please don't be offended if you ever invite me to lunch and you've already invited several other families to go with you and I turn you down because, the group isn't always great for me. Maybe you've seen the t-shirts for we introverts, the ones that say like, introverts unite. We're here, we're uncomfortable, and we want to go home. Or the one similar that says introverts unite occasionally in small groups for very limited periods of time. 15 years ago, I wouldn't have stood up here, or I was very uncomfortable to stand up here. And then my mom passed away. And then 2 years later, my sister got sick with cancer, and she passed away. And then soon after that, my dad got sick. They say you never truly become an adult until you lose your parents. And I think we also change drastically when we become parents ourselves. The events of our lives, they mold us and they shape us, and we change over time from our experiences, whether those are good or bad. And in that time, I've pushed myself well beyond my comfort zone, some by choice and often by desperation. But recently I took a trip 2 weeks ago. I was gone, and I read the book Quiet by a woman named Susan Cain, subtitled The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. And the one thing I took from it is, we're just all different. We all have different abilities, we have different interests, we have different talents, and we have different strengths. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about how that applies to our life. In Matthew 25, Jesus tells us three primary things. First, he says, we must be ready. He tells us that in the parable of the 10 virgins, or as we call it, the parable of the wise and foolish virgins. He also said, you need to use your talents for the master. He tells us that in the parable of the talents. And remember what the master told the one who had not used his talents and he just hit him? He called him wicked and lazy. And then Jesus told us that we will all be judged on what we do, not on what we know, not on what we think, not on what we feel, but on what we do. God's always used all kinds of people with all kinds of abilities. So I was thinking through this. You think back to Moses in Exodus 3 and 4. Moses, probably an introvert. It tells us in Acts 7, Stephen told us that Moses was probably 80 years old when God said, I have seen the affliction of your people. I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up from that land to a good and large land. He appeared to Moses in the burning bush, and he tells him that. I've come down to... And what Moses does? He starts making excuses, right? What shall I say? And he says, well, they won't believe me. And then in Exodus 4:10, he says, oh, my Lord, I am not eloquent, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. And then, finally he says, can't you just send somebody else? And God says to him, is not Aaron the Levite, your brother? He shall be your spokesman to the people. Moses was probably the introvert, and Aaron, the classic extrovert. We think about Acts 14:12, and Paul and Barnabas are in Lystra, and it says, in Barnabas they called Zeus and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. We don't know if Barnabas was an introvert, but clearly Paul was the extrovert, right? Acts 4:13, it said the people saw the boldness and perceived they were uneducated and untrained. Peter and John, God used different people with different talents. God calls us all to use our talents and our abilities. No matter who we are. God's called the young, Joseph, David, Esther, Daniel, King Josiah. You know, in 1 Timothy 4:12, Paul said to Timothy, "Let no one despise your youth, but be an example to the believers in word." You know, he's called the old: Noah, Abraham, Moses. The small, when he anointed David the king and David stood before Goliath. You know, God doesn't require us to be gifted in speech or to accomplish great feats of strength. And we no longer have the ability to perform miracles, and we don't really need to. God just expects us to be faithful and to use our time and talents wisely to glorify him. You know, so tonight I just want to encourage you, continue to step out of your comfort zone and strive to be pleasing to God by doing all that we can to glorify him. And if there's anything that you're struggling with tonight, if there's sin that you're struggling with, your faith that you're struggling with, anything that we can help you with, we can pray for you with. If you want to put on Christ in baptism, please come as we stand and sing the song that's been selected.